How conscious are you when it comes to sex? I'm really excited because today I'll be interviewing Alejandra Welsh Benya, who's a sex and relationship coach and educator with a background in psychology, who believes that sexual wellness and pleasure is a basic human right. She's also the founder of The Fifth House, which is an online sex education platform providing sex positive workshops and courses for adults. We will be exploring the power of conscious and shame free sex today when it comes to rewiring our nervous system through orgasms. So, Alejandra, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
To start the conversation, I'd love to get more background and ask you to tell us more about Fifth House, what made you focus on sexual wellness in your business.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So, I am basically a sex, love, and relationship coach with a background in psychology, and of also using like a tantric approach from the School of Layla Martin. Um, and I've also received training from a more academic and holistic approach from the Institution of Sexual Enlightenment and Education. It's a program called IC. And what I do is I coach men and women and couples on anything from how to like reach orgasm, how to last longer in bed, how to repair relationships, even understanding what kind of relationship style you really agree to, because monogamy,
Mm,
of course, isn't for everybody. Um, Boundaries, and actually, the main source of things why people come to me is communication, because we've
mm,
never really been taught how to communicate properly. Now, as adults, we kind of have to learn this from scratch. And I really came into this because I grew up so my background is I'm half Venezuelan, I'm half British, but I kind of grew up around the world, had a very expat living, which was amazing. And it opened me up to so many experiences and so many different cultures and languages and beliefs and religions and all that. And I had such a diverse upbringing. But one thing that I noticed is that there was so much shame around sexuality in every single part of the world that I grew up in. Um, and this was just like the common denominator globally. And as a woman, especially, I kind of felt like my voice was always the smallest in the room. My sexuality wasn't often mine. It would be defined by probably the men in the room.
mm,
And so it was really kind of like, aside from my own sort of yearning for human psychology and taboo around human psychology, it really was like my own sort of desire to understand like how can I be my own sexual self without having society and other people kind of place that on me and decide for me.
so you felt like it was this much deeper calling, I guess, to like express yourself fully within the sexual realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, growing up, I especially grew up in a lot of Islamic cultures, and so, you know, was often sort of slut shamed just by virtue of being a woman and being very sexualized in the eyes of like, you know, school kids as well as older men. And you feel that even as an 11 or 12-year-old, as you're kind of developing as a woman and you have adult male eyes gazing on you, you kind of like all of a sudden you realize you're more than, your beauty and your sexuality has a lot larger calling and definition and meaning. And kind of like, how do I define that and how do I express that in myself in a way that I feel comfortable? I mean, I wasn't even able to orgasm until I was about 23 myself. Well, with a partner. And then until about 28 was when I could actually orgasm by myself. So that just goes to show you how much shame I had around my own pleasure and, touching myself and accepting myself to allow that pleasure in me. In fact, I've got this hilarious anecdote of when I was like 13 years old in my chemistry class, and I was sat next to a boy, and he who was actually still a good friend of mine now. And he said to me, "Oh, by the way, so there's this thing called masturbation, and only boys do it, and it feels really, really good, and girls don't do it up until they get until about 18 years old, and even then, like they're kind of not allowed to do it." So then I was like, "Oh my God, what is that?" And then I did not touch myself or masturbate myself until I was about 16, 17 years old because of this
Was it-
one
Wow.
line. I mean, if he even knew the impact that he's had on my like masturbation and on my orgasm and my own pleasure, he would
Journey.
have, yeah. no idea. But sometimes it only takes that one thing.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting also how it gets introduced to you, because I think there's so much taboo around it too. I think, like, when I look back on how I started exploring sex when I was a child, it
Mm,
mostly came through my friends who had that sexual openness. Like, it was
mm,
a peer-to-peer thing. There was nothing really that, like, in sexual education was just kind of like about our periods and like what you need to do to protect yourself and how to avoid getting diseases, but it was very like top line. Nothing was about honoring your sexual expression. So that leads me to my next question though, because I'd like to understand, like, why do you think there's been so much of a lack in, like, of us being afraid of understanding pleasure in sexual education?
yeah, that is really a great question, and that's something that I've really been sort of advocating for because, like you said, at the moment it is just the scary stuff, like how to protect yourself from disease, and that sex is really only about reproduction. There's no pleasure involved in it, and I really think that it falls around sort of cultural and religious influences that most of the world has been impacted by. Um, and some cultural and religious norms have been emphasized by abstinence, really strict gender roles. I mean, in the States, there's still like a huge amount of states that are still teaching abstinence in their
Mm,
sex education. And you can see it in the amount of like, it's directly correlated to the amount of unwanted pregnancies, to the STI rates, which is so high compared to a country like Sweden or the Netherlands, where they actually talk much more openly about this in school and with their families and their parents. Um, and yeah, there's just such a limited understanding to sexuality, which just leads to a suppression of avoidance of discussion about pleasure. And there's also like a tendency to control and restrict information about sex to maintain sort of like societal order and conformity. Like if we can control you in this way, um, you know, then we can kind of manage manage things and suppress. And that's kind of scary to then change things and allow people to have opinions and allows people to be sexually open and confident. But especially in the clients that I teach and in my own like self progression, you can see night and day once you allow yourself to like remove shame because 100% of us have shame around us when it comes to sexuality. There's not one single person of us who has gone unturned. Like, even if we grow up with the most open and sophisticated parents with the best education, we still have like images on TV about how women are like suppressed and brutalized around for their sexuality. We still have like TV ads and music lyrics which are talking about bitches and sluts and all these things that are subconsciously always impacting us. So yeah, it really takes inner work just as much as like you would take care of your health, your diet, your exercise, your meditation. Sexual well-being is 100% part of your healthcare routine. And that's really how I think we should be emphasizing sex and like sexual health.
100%. But is there something you said about like the conformity piece? Like, what do you think they're trying to control when it comes to like the way they educate us on sexual education from a young age? I guess in like the normal school curriculum.
I mean, everything is kind of based around religion at the end of the day. And
Mm,
so if you are being abstinent, then you're kind of like doing well under the eyes of God, which means you'll go to heaven, blah, blah, blah. When actually what you're doing is just suppressing yourself from pleasure and removing yourself from the things that, you want, making your own decisions, finding autonomy in your own self and being able to kind of, grow as a person rather than being able to be kind of led and controlled and told by society and that sort of thing. Like it really is a macro vision and expression of something so simple as sexual identity.
no, definitely. It's crazy because I've never really like thought about the link to religion as much. I mean, it's always obviously everything originates from those belief systems that we
Yeah,
get raised into. And when it comes to, what is the norm, but I've never actually really thought about the religion piece there, which is really, really interesting that you touched on that. And when it
yeah,
comes to just to like our biochemistry, because I think there's so much misunderstood when it comes to what we feel when we're in this pleasure state of orgasms. Like, what are we? what's truly going on within us when it comes to being in that pleasure state.
Yeah. So actually, this is what I really like to ask my clients is just what happens to you when you're getting aroused? What do you feel in your body? Um, and what's happening to yourself physically? And everything from like, well, activation of pleasure centers. So our orgasm triggered the release of neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine, which is like the pleasure and reward center. And
Mhm.
that leads to intense feelings of pleasure and euphoria. We also feel like an increased blood flow. This is happening like as soon as we start to get aroused, our genitals, well, blood flows towards the genital area, which during orgasm, this blood flow is actually what intensifies and causes the engorgement and the sensitivity in the genitals. Um, and this is what's contributing to like the physical sensations that you feel associated towards the orgasm. Um, we also have the activation of the nervous system, where like that sympathetic nervous system associated to the fight or flight response happens. So, your heart rate starts beating, your blood pressure goes, like your breathing goes up and higher. And all of these like kind of trigger signals saying like, oh, I'm getting turned on, I'm getting aroused. You have release of endorphins, which is obviously like pain relief chemicals that also like relaxes you. And actually, oftentimes I say to people who have like menstrual pains, or who are going through like stressful times, is like sex or masturbation is a great sort of quote unquote cure for
Channel of
yeah,
healing.
yeah, it totally is. Um, and then you also have the release of oxytocin, which can also be like referred to as the love hormone. I don't know if you've heard of that because it really is associated to like bonding, social connection, that feeling of intimacy. So especially like whilst you're having sex and even after the orgasm itself, there's often like this release of oxytocin, which brings you much closer to your partner, and it gives you this feeling of connectedness, um, which is why I think it's so important to maintain this moment of aftercare during sex, which is, for me, I see it as sort of three parts. You have the build up, which is the arousal state. Then you have the act itself. And then a lot of people, once they've orgasmed, or they've ejaculated, you know, they can very easily roll over and fall asleep or get out, have a shower, and leave the person sort of behind. But actually, aftercare is so important because it's just another essential part of the act of sex. Sex doesn't end once the person ejaculated. Uh, it
Mm.
really it really is so important to like maintain that bond and even discuss it beforehand. Like, I'd love it if we could just lie in bed for 10 minutes cuddling, or, if we had a shower together, or maybe if we put on a movie afterwards and just lay in bed holding each other. Or it could even be like, I sometimes need 20 minutes space after I've ejaculated, but then afterwards we can come together. But really formulating something to happen after the fact, because we do release this chemical of like bonding and connection, and then to have that broken and not met, can almost like lessen the experience, no matter how beautiful it was before. It really is like a whole piece of the experience
Connection. Yeah, 100%. It
of
almost creates like
connection.
this void when you don't nurture like
Yeah.
the bond that's just happened and the release that's just happened. But I feel like I've had this conversation before with some of my clients as well when it comes to like men and women after they're
Mm,
orgasming, because I feel like men naturally also go through this like depletion
mm,
where it's
yeah.
difficult for them to give more from after they do ejaculate. Do you know why that is? Or is that just kind of like on a unique case? Or is there really like a gender difference when it comes to the way, we release our orgasms and what that means?
There is a slight gender difference, and yeah, that it totally makes sense that it is a huge energy release. You feel exhausted, you feel tired, but the oxytocin is still there. There's still that like bond and like connection feeling.
Mm,
However, for men, there is that depletion feeling, but it doesn't mean by any means that like there's no need for that connection afterwards. And in fact, that's often what is missing from, say, a casual one night stand or casual sex. Often somebody could just break it off immediately, much too soon, than it should be for fear of, oh no, they're going to get attached, so I better leave beforehand. But a casual sex scenario doesn't have to mean that at all, you know. Two grown consenting adults can still have a beautiful evening with cuddles without all of a
Mm.
sudden thinking like, oh no, no, now they're going to be completely attached to me and I've got to run and leave, you know. Which
Yeah.
is why sometimes casual sex can get a bad rap because, you know, it's not quote unquote wrapped up properly or it's not really executed um beautifully to the end.
How can we help people fix that fear of attachment?
That's a good question. And that really boils down to education,
Mm.
100% education. Um, there is this kind of like global idea that women get attached and men are like the fleeting ones. But actually, when it comes down to it, there's been quite a lot of research done around, you know, interviews speaking to college student men, saying like, why, you know, why are you sort of doing this like wham bam, thank you, ma'am, sex, you know, where you
Bam,
just
bam.
get in,
Thank you,
get
man.
out.
I love it.
Yeah, and it's honestly the societal pressure from other men, thinking like it's a numbers game, you know, you have to get in as many because that makes you more of a man. It's just like locker
Mm.
room talk where you know numbers count. Doesn't even matter if you're enjoying it or if you like the person. It's about how much sex you've had. And then when it becomes granular and you talk to the person individual, the man individually, they'll say actually it's not fulfilling me one, and I am missing that connection. And so we are all as human beings really looking for that nurture and that connection, but it's just really a like disconnect between the sexes. Have you heard of the orgasm gap?
No, I haven't.
So this is something that everybody needs to know about. The orgasm gap is basically like a play on words on the pay gap, like the gender pay gap. And it's basically, I think, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but um, it's like 80 to 85% of men are having orgasms compared to like 40 or 50% of women who are having orgasms. Um, and this is heterosexual men and heterosexual women. And the difference is even larger during a one night stand. I think it's 11 or 10% of women are having orgasms on a one night stand. So the discrepancy is huge. And the reason for that isn't because, you know, women have different, you know, orgasm arousals or genitals that aren't, you know, aroused to the kind of orgasms that we're looking for. It's literally because lesbian women have no gender gap, like no orgasm gap.
No
They're
orgasm.
orgasming just about the same. And same as gay men. It's literally only in heterosexual men and women. And one, it's because we're not communicating at all. We're not asking what we want. Two, it's because heterosexual sex is just focused on penis and vagina sex, so penetration. And
Mm.
when you remove that from the equation, then you realize, oh my God, there's so many other ways that actually we can turn each other on and that we can give each other pleasure. Because actually, only about 18% of women can come from penetration alone. Like you either need to be coupling that with clitoral stimulation or other stimulation, but a lot of men and even women don't know this, and they're having this like sort of jackhammer sex of blah 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 blah, and the women are like, "Fuck, is there something wrong with me because I'm not coming like they do on the pornos?" And the guys are like, "Oh, I'm done. Great, she's had a great time too because she faked her orgasm," and it's like this perpetual cycle. Um, and it's really down and lack of research. Like, you know, there's hardly any research done around clitoris and female pleasure. So it's no wonder that like we don't know what we want as women.
Yeah, and we struggle in communicating that in certain occasions. I guess I feel like what's really needs to be honored in that communication piece is like also knowing how to like show up for like because I feel like what causes this really big gap in the communication from what you just explained is when you're also just feeling this like this shame around like your body and your desires. And I think like if we're able to break that like that fundamental foundation of like I actually deserve to have what I want. I deserve to feel this
Mm-hmm.
pleasure, and I deserve to communicate like everything that I want right now in this moment, and the beauty that I see in this person. Because I also feel like the communication is also on multi levels. Don't you agree? It's like we need
Totally.
to communicate on so many different ways beyond just what we want and desire, but also like what we feel we need, what we perceive in the moment and in that connection.
Yes. Nailed it, girl.
I love it. I love it. I could talk to you all day about this. It's amazing. But I
Yeah.
think to because for people who don't have this awareness, because obviously this is something when it comes to like the way I connect with sex, I'm a very sensual person. So
Yeah.
I've always been able to just like I've never had blocks in terms of what I want to communicate.
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to people when it comes to, building this awareness within their own sex lives and like a practice they could maybe introduce to check in when it comes to what they really want out of their sex and pleasure relationships?
Yeah. So first of all, what I tell everybody, first thing I ask people in my coaching is what is your masturbation practice? What is your pleasure practice? And
Mm,
if you don't have one, then, you know, bad marks. You need to be having your own, even if you're in a couple, especially if you're in a couple as well. Like a lot of people think that if I'm masturbating while I have a partner, then I'm cheating on them, or, it's bad or it's wrong, or it's because I don't want them. No, you need to be like, you need to have the superpower to be able to arouse yourself and to turn yourself on and to know what like makes you feel sexy. And so first of all, like masturbation I is definitely like the training ground for good sex. Kama says that and I absolutely love it because that is where you get to experiment. That's where you get to figure out what turns you on, what makes you feel good, and also what you don't really like. So you can communicate that with your partner. And I've been in situations before where I've kind of just expected the man to know what turns me on.
mm,
And when they ask me, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Don't you know? Because I don't like you're the guy, you should know. But actually, it's completely our responsibility to know what is like making us turned on. And that way we can communicate openly. And that is super sexy as well in the
mm,
bedroom. Like touch me here, moving their hand to where you want them to go, or I like this, touch me like that. It's also like a form of dirty talk in the bedroom, which you can communicate exactly what you want. So it's kind of a win-win. And I think also like just considering what your own beliefs and values are and your attitude towards sexuality is, so you can like also communicate your boundaries and your preferences. Um, Educate yourself around like consent, your own anatomy, like the amount of women. You guys get it easy in one respect because their penis is like outside of their body, so they see it every day, they wash it every day. But for women, like we don't know what's down there. Like a lot of us don't even know what our own vulvas look like.
mm.
So I think that's really important as well. And then obviously like developing the ability to openly communicate about sex with your partner. It is like you said about shedding the shame, not feeling like embarrassed or like we're going to get judged, because that really is what's holding us back from communicating is the judgment, right?
100%. Feel it,
And
yeah.
then yeah, I think also just like practicing mindfulness, and there's a few like I guess very simple tantric techniques. If you'd like me to go into a few,
Yeah, no, I'd
uh,
love to learn. I'd love to learn.
yeah, I mean, this is really like the basis of Tantra, and it's really simple actually. It's stuff that we do like in our everyday life, but we just need to like add consciousness and presence to it. And the first one I would say is, yeah, just practice being fully present and engaged in your sexual experiences, like with your partner or by yourself. So focus on your sensations, your emotions, your energy, your touch, smell, taste. Like sometimes what I do is I like put um, a very meditative playlist on. I get my glass dildo. I make sure I've got loads of lube around me. And I literally just like play with the dildo around my body, around my breasts, down my thighs, before even penetrating the dildo. Because, as women, sometimes we kind of like get that pushed into us before ahead of time, before we're warmed up, before we're really ready to go. And so when we're in control of it, when we get to decide when it goes in and when it comes out, that's really empowering as well. Um, the second thing I would say is conscious breathing. So deep, slow breathing will help relax the body. It helps tighten sensitivity. It builds energy, especially when you're with your partner. Like eye contact with them and try and sync your breath with your partner. And it's just that easy. Like it'll take a couple of breaths to, and it'll feel a bit awkward at the beginning, but you'll like suddenly drop into matching your breath together. And that really fosters like a sense of unity and connection. And you can do like breathing techniques, like the synchronized breathing, like I just said, where you're both matching the in breath and the out breath. And you can even touch each other's chests over the heart to feel it sinking together. That's really like sweet and connecting. Or you could do like a circular breath in which, I start from the womb all the way back up my spine and breathe out into my partner's mouth. And they breathe it down through their spine, through their groin, and then up back. And you're doing
Oh,
this kind of
wow,
circular motion.
beautiful. So
Yeah, your breath.
you time it, you kind of get into that
Yeah,
subconscious state.
yeah.
I
And
love
you also
that.
visualize it like as
Yeah,
a bright ball of
vortex.
energy or force, exactly.
I love it.
Um, yeah, and you just sit cross-legged, like usually the male presence or the male energy will sit on the base, and then the female energy will sit on top with the legs crossed around. It's called Yap Yum, and it's a really cozy, like beautiful position to be in, and just to practice that like breathing. And you can be penetrated or not penetrated in that moment. Um, Another thing would be rituals and ceremonies. It could be as easy as like incorporating a meaningful ritual into your sexual experience, like creating a sacred space, lighting candles, practicing intention setting together. And that can really create like a sense of presence and intentionality to enhance like the depth and meaning of what you're about to go into. One thing as well that Tantra really encourages is to expand your experience of pleasure beyond just the genitals.
Hmm.
So, playing as well with sensory awareness. So, touch, textures, get feathers, get, latex, different temperatures. Like the glass dildo might be cold, it might be warm if you heat it up. So, pay attention to like subtle sensations and energy flow within the body.
And the contrast that you can tune into.
Yeah. And then, I mean, out of everything, I think the most important thing is really education. Like,
Hmm.
understand what turns you on, understand like the risks, the pleasures, boundaries, communication. Yeah, that is
Beautiful.
when I speak to other educators, I always ask them the question like, what do you think makes an epic lover? And 9 times out of 10, people will say communication.
Yeah. I think it's also creates like the most successful relationships, communicating on all levels and then allowing the sex to kind of be its own language. So
Totally.
beautiful. Thank you so much, Ale, for sharing these insights and this beautiful wisdom. I feel like I could talk to you all day about it, honestly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to also thank you and like conclude on this conversation, I'd love to invite you to do a cognitive assessment through one of our sponsors, where we would like to invite you to assess your own brain health and nervous system potential, which we've been discussing now from a different angle. But if possible, I'll invite you now to be a host, and we could
Sure.
finalize this conversation with a live gameplay.
Super. Okay, let
Okay,
me.
guys, you should now be able to share your screen and we can start the game.
Great. I'm just gonna have the wrong tab. Give me a second. Okay, I think we're in. Share screen. Can you see me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yes, continue.
Perfect.
Hang on, let me move
I'm
all these
playing
things.
musical notes. We're going to have to match the frequencies.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll be able
The
to.
start task.
Yeah, perfect. Let's do it.
I didn't read the instructions. Okay, no. Try to determine how long the figures were moving during the computer's turn in order to replay the sequence when it's your turn. Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, so far so good. I'm struggling to hear the sound, but I assume they're in your headphones.
I can hear them. Can you not hear them?
That's good. Accuracy on. Because we're testing your inhibition here. So far. So good. Nice look at that. 85% for
Okay,
auditory
good. I was
perception.
gonna say, I used to play so many instruments when I was a kid, and I would have to do like so much theory around this. So I was like, if I don't get this right,
No, amazing. Great job, Ale. Thank you so much for playing with us today, for sharing your wisdom and sharing the craft that you do for the world. It was honestly such a pleasure to interview
likewise, such fun. Plus, if you ever want to talk about sex, I'm here. I love it.
you. Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.